I now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing and for all of our witnesses for being here today. I represent the 1st District of Kansas and have long said that my top 3 priorities in this farm bill are crop insurance, trade, and oversight. Last year, as mentioned, the U.S. exported just under $200 billion of ag products. Kansas contributed about $6 billion to that. Our products that we export out of Kansas are beef and other proteins, wheat, sorghum, corn, goes to nearly 190 foreign markets around the world. Considering those numbers, I believe Congress must think critically and carefully about trade and trade promotion, especially as we authorize this farm bill. I'm proud, and this has come up a couple times, MAP and FMD. You know, that's why I co-led the Ag Export Promotion Act in this Congress. This legislation would allocate additional resources to MAP and FMD, which, you know, we got to remind everybody, we have not increased these numbers since 2002. So it's way over time, and given the return on investments that we're talking about, that we had more money there, and would like to get that incorporated into this farm bill. A handful of questions. First for you, Mr. Griffith. You mentioned in your testimony about Vietnam being a success story of increasing our trade relationship through these programs. Any other success stories come to mind that you can think of as we've benefited from these programs?
I don't know if I have another specific one, but I would just generally say, given the how dynamic the global market is and the needs to have access to markets to move from places of surplus to deficit and how that changes constantly, as I said, a diligent and continuous focus and funding in this area. We never know when we're going to have those success stories or where they're going to be, but we need to have frameworks in place and agreements in place that allow for that to happen in time of need.
Yep, great. Again, my takeaways from this hearing is just we've got to be focused on increasing MAP and FMD, given the return on investment, and if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. And we're leaving trade dollars on the table for our ag producers. Incredibly important. Next couple of questions are for you, Ambassador Dowd. Great being with you last week in our home state of Kansas. Great meeting your dad last week. Great seeing your son here today. My question for you, first one, we know that a lack of effective cold storage or the inability to distribute, on a country's receiving end as we export are major barriers to expanding and diversifying our export markets. Can you share your thoughts on the importance of building out cold chain capacity and help us identify any areas in the Farm Bill that we could help to potentially meet this need?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a great question. And the first point I think to make is where the U.S. really excels, where our advantage is in value-added agricultural exports. Pork, beef, poultry, dairy, that's a value-added export. But in order to do that, you've got to have cold chain technology. We've done well in exports to CAF, to DR, but we need help in terms of infrastructure to expand that. We talk about the Indo-Pacific Partnership, and it's tragic that we're not going to talk about tariffs and market access, but I think cold chain technology and infrastructure in the context of that would be a fantastic conversation. We've talked about Africa. Goodness knows we need to have more infrastructure and cold chain technology in that part of the world as well. So I think that is an enormously important question.
I appreciated your comments. And when we talk about value-added agriculture, we've got to remember when we export our proteins, our commodity producers benefit greatly from that. It trickles down. Let's add the value here, and then let's figure out ways to improve cold storage over there to help rise the water, so to speak, for all the boats on the pond. Second question for you, Ambassador Dowd. And this actually was a question the chairman had asked to Mr. Griffith, but it was on my list for you as well. So we'll let you answer the question, Ambassador. And this has to do with China, or with India and the WTO, subsidies and that issue with their wheat and rice farmers, where they're subsidizing them, which far exceeds the limits. But I've been working a lot with Representative Crawford. We've been leading efforts to urge USTR and the White House to engage in a formal dispute process to ensure that India is compliant with its WTO commitments. Ambassador, are you in favor of a formal dispute process? And if so, can you speak to its benefit? And if not, why not?
Yeah, Congressman, it's a great question. I think the answer is it's time. You know, the first, when I was in the administration, my first trip to the WTO in Geneva, I was the guy that slid the first ever counter notifications across the table to my Indian counterpart there in Geneva about rice and wheat and their subsidies. You know, there's a reason India is the largest rice exporter in the world. There's a reason they're now exporting wheat. It's their subsidies. And they are so far beyond what is their ability to do under their Uruguay Round Agreement. It's time to address it.
And I think far past time we stood up for our American ag producers in so doing. So I know I've gone past my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here.